never happened. Okay, welcome to review number 3. We're going to go over all the questions that have a star or have an E by them. Don't be confused. That doesn't mean the answer is E. Like this one right here, the answer is not B. That just has to do with the bureaucracy. So I know the code is confusing. But this is going to remind us what to study when it comes to these issues. A lot of them are going to cross over. But, they're going to involve how the Congress interacts with the other branches, for example. All right, so let's start with number 6. Which of the following best describes gerrymandering? Which that reminds me, before we answer the question, let's quickly run down some vocabulary when it comes to gerrymandering that can be confusing. Okay, so real quickly, every 10 years is the census. It's every 10 years where we officially count the population. It's in years divisible by 10, so 2010 we had a census. And we do that for 2 reasons. So we can figure out each state's number of seats in the House of Representatives, because that's based on population, and that is called apportionment. Now, it's called either apportionment, or because we redo it, apportionment, every 10 years, sometimes they refer to it as reapportionment. Alright? And then you have also, but we count the citizens because we have to have roughly equal populations in those districts. So when we tell a state how many districts it will have, sometimes it increases or decreases, in which case they have to redraw their district lines because they have more districts or less districts. Sometimes it stays the same, but they have to draw them in such a way the populations are roughly equal, so they might have to redraw the lines for that purpose, and that is called redistricting. And the most confusing vocabulary word of all, redistricting, is the idea that bad redistricting in a way where you do not have roughly equal populations in your district, is called malapportionment. Confusingly, that does not mean bad apportionment. It means bad redistricting. Bad apportionment doesn't happen because Congress uses a math formula. Alright? Bad redistricting can happen because, remember, this one, apportionment, is up to Congress by a formula. Redistricting is up to state legislatures. And this is very confusing also. Or state governments, however they want to do it. It's usually state legislatures. This is also confusing because you think, oh, okay, the Republicans control the Texas legislature. They're going to draw their own lines to benefit themselves. Well, not really. Because that's state lawmakers drawing lines for the national House of Representatives. So they're not drawing their own lines, they're drawing lines for the national people who run for the national House of Representatives. Now, they can draw them in such a way to benefit their party, though. And by the way, when you do redistrict and your populations are unbalanced, that's malapportionment. When you redistrict to achieve some political goal, that's gerrymandering. And then within that, the kind that has been declared not a violation of the Constitution, so constitutional is partisan gerrymandering. That's gerrymandering to benefit a party, and that happens all the time. The one that's been declared unconstitutional if it's designed to disenfranchise a different race would be racial gerrymandering. That one's been declared unconstitutional. Okay? So, let's roll back over here and read the question. This is number 6. It says, which of the following best describes gerrymandering? The party in power wins 4 or 5 surrounding districts by very small margins. By the way, the 2 main methods for gerrymandering a district are to pack your opponent into one district and then you win all the others, or to crack your opponent into multiple districts so they can't win any because they're too spread out. Alright, so that sounds like a method of gerrymandering, but I don't know if that's a good definition. So I'm going to keep that one in mind and go read the others. The Supreme Court requires that state legislatures must adopt the doctrine of one person, one vote. That is true of redistricting. Alright, that's the Supreme Court's way of saying you cannot have unbalanced districts. You can't have one person's vote count different than another person's vote, which is what unbalancing the districts would do. And by the way, remember, when that happens, if there is malapportionment, the district with the small population benefits because it's a smaller number of people picking one person for Congress, as opposed to a larger number of people sharing that power. Anyway, so that is a true statement about the Supreme Court, but I'm not sure if it's a good description of gerrymandering, because gerrymandering is to achieve a political goal. The party in control of the state legislature draws district boundaries in such a way as to favor its own candidates in subsequent elections. So it's not really to favor themselves, but candidates from their own parties. I like C very much. By polling voters, party officials are able to determine how citizens will vote. That's just a poll. And the public decides which issues are most important and tells the elected officials how to vote on specific bills. That is not gerrymandering, so it's got to be C. Alright, let's bump ahead to 14. If I miss one that has a star or an E, let me know. 14 says, which of the following best describes pork barrel politics? Well, that reminds me of a whole area of things we need to remember. Alright, let's see. Related topics here. Alright, if we get a chance, we'll review how a bill becomes a law, but you all have notes on that. But in the process of a bill becoming a law, it is very common for a particular representative from a particular district or a particular senator from a particular state to try to acquire national money to pay for a project that only benefits that person's district or state. So national money for a local project is called pork barrel politics. All right, that practice is called pork barrel politics, or just pork. How do you spell barrel? The spelling has been lost to time. Oh no, there it is. Yeah, just one up. Politics. And sometimes, now it's more common, pork usually doesn't take the form of, I'm going to write a bill that's pork for my district. It usually takes the form of an amendment to another bill that's likely to pass, because you're thinking, my project may not pass on its own, but if I attach it to another project, it will. And that's known as earmarking. Sometimes we refer to this as earmarks. That's a pork barrel in the form of an amendment. And why, now, of course, you can't just attach whatever amendments you want. You have to get the majority of the floor to agree to attach your amendment. Why would the majority of the floor, whether in the House or the Senate, agree to your local, your earmark that only benefits your district or your state? Because this is these have negative connotation. This is pretty unpopular. Why do other congressmen agree to it? They want their own projects to pass through. All right? So this idea of you agree to my pork, I'll agree to yours is called log rolling. And by the way, I said it's unpopular. It's unpopular nationally, but of course it's popular for the people who benefit. So the pork that benefits our district tends to be popular in our district. All right? The pork that benefits our state tends to be popular in our state. Okay? So there's pork barrel politics for you. All right, and by the way, it's unlikely that the answer to a pork question will involve some sort of normative opinion statement like it's wasteful or it's corrupt. All right, it's more likely that it'll be objective, some sort of statement of fact and definition. So let's see what the answer is here. The Office of Management of the Budget negotiates with Congress to get the President's budget proposal passed. I agree that the OMB advises the President on his proposed budget and prepares it, helps him prepare for it. They bring together the proposals of the various executive branch agencies and the bureaucracy and put together a proposed budget, but I don't think that's pork. Senator, and I don't think they negotiate with Congress. I think the President primarily does that. Senators from states with agricultural economies promote farm price supports. That might be an example of pork, right, using federal money to prop up the price of farm products. I like B okay. Let me see if there's a better answer. Voters in rural areas support different issue positions than do voters in metropolitan areas. This is voters, not congressmen. So congressmen engage in pork. Members of Congress negotiate bills so that individual districts get money for projects that do not benefit the nation as a whole. I like that one as a definition of pork. This is more of an example. I think that's kind of sneaky of them to throw an example on there as the wrong answer. I like D, though, is the best answer. What about E? Members of the Senate Judiciary Committee refuse to endorse the President's nominees to the federal courts. By the way, they are the ones that have the most influence over advice and consent for presidential nominees, but they're not. That's not pork. What's up?
What would be the difference between earmarks and a rider?
A rider is simply an amendment to a bill that is unrelated to the nature of the bill. We would say it's non-germane. Remember, a rider is not allowed in the House. All of amendments have to be germane. But a rider may not be pork. It just may be unrelated. It could also be pork, though. If it's an unrelated amendment that is money for a special project in a district, it is a earmark. It's pork. All right? A lot of riders are pork. A lot of times they're the same thing. Let's jump ahead to 20. Which of the following is true of both members of the House and the senators? You, of course, want to look over the differences, just little facts like the different age requirements. I believe it's 27 for the House and 30 for the Senate, 35 for the presidency. You have to live in your district or state is a very common requirement, but I think that you may have to just live in your state to run for a district in that state. You may have to live in a district. But those are obscure facts that they don't tend to ask about. They tend to ask about the big picture stuff. All right, they must be citizens of the United States. My gut just tells me they all have to be citizens to be members of our Congress. So that's not. Whoa, that seems to be true of both. Can that be the answer? Let's make sure the other ones aren't the answer, because that one seems too obvious. All right, they serve 2-year terms of office. No, senators serve 6-year terms. They can have their election chances directly affected by reapportionment. Now, that's very tempting. Except apportionment, gerrymandering, anything involving districts cannot possibly apply to the Senate, right? Because they don't have districts. They don't redraw lines. They represent the state at large, meaning the whole state. Both of them represent the state at large. That means they don't divide it in half. All right? So that's not right. They must be at least 30 years of age. That is true of senators, but members of the House can be 27, I believe, is the minimum age. They must have statewide appeal in order to get elected. That's true of senators, but it's not true of members of the House. You only have to appeal to your district. That's your constituencies. That's your, remember, constituents is the people who you represent, whether they voted for you or not, whether they're even allowed to vote or not. They just live in your area. So, reps have a district constituency. Senators have a statewide constituency. The president has a nationwide constituency. All right? That's different than your electorate. Let me write that board. Your electorate is the people who can vote for you. They might have voted for your opponent, but that's the people who vote in your elections. And, of course, senators have a statewide electorate to go with their statewide constituency. And members of the House only have a district-wide electorate to go with their district-wide constituency. Notice, even I am having this really focus to keep all the language straight. If these were free response questions, you'd want to make sure that you didn't say constituent when you mean electorate, and electorate when you mean constituency. Right. Fiscal policies refer to the government's power to. I put this in the Congress section because this is really up to Congress, right? The president will recommend a budget, but fiscal policy, as we know from government and from economics, is the power of government spending and taxation. Right? And then how they compare to each other is the budget. All right? And if the taxation falls short of government spending, in other words, the government spends more money than it takes in revenue from taxes, you get a deficit, and you add those up over time, and you get the national debt, which can be a problem if you have to pay interest on it, which we do. Anyway, what's the answer? Taxes spent. Hopefully that's one of the easiest questions on the test. That was on the free response one year as what is fiscal policy of the government test. They could easily put that in the economics or the government, and you write it's government spending and taxation. You get full credit, you move on. All right, let's look at these other answers. Regulate specific industries. That makes rules for. Typically, that is, if it's not a law, who makes regulations? The bureaucracy, the agencies in the executive branch that we call the bureaucracy. Reapportioning congressional seats, we reviewed that. Control the supply of money, that's monetary policy set by the Federal Reserve, which is part of the bureaucracy. All right, it's an agency, but it doesn't control fiscal policy. And then enforcing treaties is not fiscal policy. The franking privilege is free mail to your constituents. All congressmen enjoy this. And you can't send your constituents campaign materials, vote for me, but you can send them updates on what you've been doing. And you typically send them updates on what you've been doing that's good, that benefits them. And so is that log rolling? No, that's trading votes in Congress. Is that soft money? No, that's where a donor will donate, has a limit on how much they can donate to a particular campaign, a particular candidate, so they give to the party instead. And that was made illegal by the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act. A legislative privilege, that's true. That's a privilege of Congress. It's also part of the incumbency advantage for email to your constituents. It's an election law violation. No, it's okay. Nothing wrong with that. And it's an incumbency advantage. So, yikes. Which one would you rather put? Well, this must mean something that I don't know about. If I was to, and I don't. I mean, I really don't. There must be something called a legislative privilege that I don't know about. Or maybe they're trying to trick you into thinking, oh, executive privilege is the president's power to avoid testifying in court or before Congress about conversation with his advisors. All right? So his advisor will be honest with him, so they won't have to worry about going to court. So maybe they're trying to trick you into thinking there's a thing called legislative privilege. I think this is a poor answer choice to put on here, because it is a privilege that members of the legislature have. I guess that's not the official name, or maybe that means something else that I've never heard of, but I definitely know it's an incumbency advantage. All right? I know that to be true. I hope that's the right answer. Is that the right answer when you look at the back?
Yeah.
Good. Sometimes they say the government test is not very clean, meaning it is not, it has murky questions and answers. People who make it don't say that. They think it's a great test, but it is kind of murky.
You said 26.
26? Oh, I'm sorry. Down to 26. The committee that resolves differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill is called that's a conference committee. That's just a fact to know. They love to ask that question. They love to put it on free response and say, what's a conference committee? Let me make sure the camera can see, and we'll quickly trace how a bill becomes a law. It's one of the more, it covers so many possible questions, it's a good thing to review. Remember, if you have the House and the Senate on both sides, it's got to be introduced. So I'll put dittos. It's got to be introduced by an actual member of that chamber. The president can't introduce bills, although he can recommend them and get somebody to introduce them. But formal introduction is up to the congressman. Then it gets referred to committee for study, and that's where, in both chambers, that's where most legislating is done. That's where they work on it, they study it, they gather evidence, they hear from lobbyists, they mark it up, they do a lot of negotiating. A lot of the party negotiation happens there. The Republicans on the committee negotiate with the Democrats. Most bills die there and never get reported out, but if it is reported out, all right, let's say reported out. If it is reported out by the committee, so that over here too, it will, in the House it will go to the Rules Committee to attach a rule about who can debate and for how long. Sometimes it's only members of the committee can engage in the debate, the floor debate, or only members of the committee, or anybody can debate, or there will be no debate. But either way, there's an attachment about who can debate and how long the debate will be. There's also a rule attached about amendments. Can there be amendments? Who can amend? They don't have to say that the amendments have to be germane, because that's always true in the House. All right? All amendments must be germane, G-E-R-M-A-N-E. And then from there it goes to the floor for what they call floor action, which is floor debate, discussion, and if they get to it, a vote. There is no Rules Committee in the Senate because there is unlimited debate. That's why the filibuster is in play. And there is basically unlimited amendments. You can't just attach an amendment on your own. You have to have the majority of the floor agree. But there's no limit on the amendments, and there's no limit on the type of amendment. That's why we can have riders, unrelated, non-germane amendments. So it goes to the floor on both sides, where you need a simple majority to pass, 50% plus 1. If it does, by this point, there's some chance that the two, we want to call them versions, that the version in the House and the version in the Senate are different, in which case they got to get together in conference committee, which is the nature of this question. To sort out the differences, the senators on the it's a joint committee composed of members of both sides, and make sure you look up the types of committees. That'd be standing committee is a permanent committee, always exists because it studies issues that are always around, like taxes and foreign affairs. And then you have select committees, which are temporary with a specific purpose, and then they disappear when they're done. Right. Well, this is a special type of committee called a joint committee. This is not the only type of joint committee. There are others, but this is a special joint committee called a conference committee where they sort out the differences. Then they have to send them, if they come up with what we call a compromise version, don't call it a conference version. The conference committee makes the compromise version. Don't call this a compromise committee. If you can't remember the name, call it a compromise committee, because they'll know what you mean. They'll just maybe count off one. Anyway, it goes back to each chamber for another vote because nobody has approved the compromise version. Neither side, so they have to re-vote on it so they can put one compromise version on the president's desk for signature, where he can veto. If he sends it back with a veto message, they can override it with a 2/3 majority of both chambers. And don't get confused. Don't let them trick you into saying a veto is when the president takes no action. If he takes no action in 10 days, it doesn't veto. It becomes law on its own. However, he can pocket veto by, if it's less than 10 days till the end of the Congress's session, when all bills die, he can hang on to the bill, wait for that to happen. If 10 days go by, it becomes law. But if there's not 10 days left, he can hang on the bill, wait for the session to end, the bill will die on its own. And it technically wasn't vetoed, so can't be overridden. It's called the pocket veto. All right.
They die out in the Rules Committee?
That is a question I don't know the answer to. My gut says no. Can the Rules Committee just sit on a bill and let it die there? I guess it could happen. I don't know. That's a question for somebody who's not me, member of Congress or something. That's one of those times that I just claim that the true answer's been lost in time. All right. Oh crap! What was the answer? Sorry. Conference committee. Oh, there's the types of committees. I don't know the special committee. That's just another word for select committee. Anyway. And you want to look up, remember I told you there were specific committees to know by heart? You want to go over those? No, let's go. Good time. So what are the committees that you should know? Like the special, the committees that are really important enough to know the names of them. There are some in the House. There are some in the Senate. Let's do it like this. They both have a budget committee in charge of sort of how does government spending compare to taxation in total. When you take total government spending and taxation, compare them, you get the budget. Well, they each have a budget committee to study that. All right? They also each have a tax-specific committee. In the House, it's more powerful because tax legislation must start in the House. And so we call this the Ways and Means Committee. In the Senate, it's called the Finance Committee. Not that senators don't get to consider tax bills, they just can't start there. And then we have this sort of the Government Spending Committee in each side. It's called Appropriations. And that's called the same thing on both sides. Then, let's see, also in the Senate, you need to know the foreign affairs or foreign relations? It's foreign affairs. That does not sound right. Foreign relations. Senate Foreign Relations Committee deals with foreign relations, including approving treaties. And then you have the fact that the Senate gets to approve nominees of the president for the cabinet, for judgeships, I'm not sure if that's a word, for all national judges. And so the Judiciary Committee is particularly important for that. Okay? So there's your 8 committees to know. All right. Got bogged down a little bit there. Foreign relations or foreign affairs? This is a good question for relations. Oh, yeah, what's up? Relations. I knew it all along. The president's role as chief diplomat is revived from the fact that diplomat means he's the guy that deals with foreign nations. Now that entails some informal powers, like sort of being the referee in disputes between foreign nations, between, for example, Israel and Palestine. Yeah, Palestine. And also sort of, he has a large role in recognizing foreign nations, whether they're considered a true nation by the United States or not. But the role as chief diplomat, I don't know if I would call that an informal power, because he has the formal authority to negotiate treaties with 2/3 vote of the Senate. We call that the advice and consent of the Senate. That requires 2/3. To confirm a piece of paper, the Senate needs 2/3. To confirm a simple human for a job, like a judge or a member of the cabinet, or the head of an agency in the bureaucracy, those require simple majorities. Anyway, delegated power, I don't think so. Concurrent power, that's a power that belongs to both the national government and the states. That can't be right. Reserved power, that only goes to the states. Express powers go to the national government. So I guess it's an informal power. Although his power to make treaties is formal, so maybe it's informal that because he gets to make treaties, we also let him be the chief diplomat. Is the answer A in the back of the book? Or as they say, it's E, it's an express power.
They say delegate.
Really?
Yeah.
Delegated power, chief diplomat. Well, I guess I would miss that one. I don't quite know what they mean. I guess I'll look that up and give everybody an update, but it says B, delegated power.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that. I would have put, I would have said, well, I don't know, and sort of had to decide between, is it express because they specifically state his power to negotiate treaties in the Constitution, all right, or is it informal because, okay, well, that also makes him the chief sort of diplomat with other countries in a lot of informal ways. So I might have put informal, to be honest with you. I have no idea what it means by delegated power. I doubt it's in the glossary of your textbook. Sorry. All right. I was going right to it. You just didn't know. Number 30 says, which of the following is true of the seniority system in Congress in relation to committee leadership and committee staffing? There's a couple of tricks that I know they're going for here. I haven't read the answers yet, but I know they're trying to trick you into saying seniority means older, when in fact it means you've been there the longest. And they're likely to try to trick you into saying 100% of the time seniority guides the committee leadership. When that's not true. First of all, the leader, the chairperson of the committee always comes from the majority party. And then the majority of the seats on the committees go to the majority party. But within that, it's not necessarily the senior member of the committee. It's often the senior member that is the chairperson. That used to be the rule, but not anymore. Now that is sort of a guideline. Now it's up to a vote. So let's see if I can find the answer now. Members of Congress with the longest continuing service are assured. Is that 100% the case? No. That's a good definition of seniority, but they're not assured the chairmanship. Members of Congress must be elected from safe seats to accrue committee seniority. That's not true. Seniority just means you've been there the longest. No, a safe seat is considered a seat that that party is likely to win again. The incumbent is likely to win it again, unless they're beaten in the primary. So sometimes we put a number on that of you won 55% or more of the votes. And then we say a marginal seat. It's not safe. It's very close, so you want less than 55% of the votes. But that's not true of seniority. Members of congressional committees are the most senior members of the body's major party. No, all of them are on committees, multiple committees, because there's a lot of work to do. The oldest members of Congress have the most seniority. That's a trick. I hope it's E. The chairs of congressional committees tend to be, I like that, tend to be senior members of the body's majority party. I like this, it says tend to and not. Notice how they put the trick as A and the real one buried down here at D. That is classic test maker psychology there, man. All right, so here's a hypothetical government. This is not how government is actually right now. So I bet the answer is divided government. We have a Republican president, and at least one of the chambers of Congress is held by the other party, Democrat. And I bet they're trying to trick me into saying, no, it's not divided, because divided means the chambers of Congress are split. That's not true. Divided means the president is from a different party than at least one of the chambers of Congress. All right? So the answer is divided government. Just quickly, nonpartisan would mean no party. That's obviously not true. Unicameral government means one chamber. We have two chambers, the House and the Senate. That can't be true. Unitary government is where the states exist because the national government allows it. The states are subservient to the national government's power. That's not what we have. We have a federal government where the states have their own powers, separate from the national government powers. The answer is D. De-aligned government. If that means something, I don't know what it is. Okay, the primary function of the White House staff, remember that's as opposed to the cabinet. They both work for the president. And the major differences are the cabinet doesn't. The cabinet member is the heads of all the departments: the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of the Interior, etc. And they typically have secretary in their title. They are appointed by the president, but they require Senate approval. The White House staff is appointed by the president, do not require Senate approval. And the White House staff is exactly what it sounds like. They work in the White House. Sometimes they call them the White House office. They work in the White House with the president, so they advise him on day-to-day matters. They see him every day. Whereas so that's kind of an advantage they have in influencing the president. They're with him in the room when the decision is made. Sometimes we call that the rule of propinquity. The idea being whoever's in the room when the decision is made gets to have input. The cabinet, their advantage is they tend to be experts in their field. If you're the Attorney General, he's the one without secretary in his name. He's the leader of the Department of Justice. He tends to be somebody who knows a lot about law and being a lawyer, being an attorney, and a lot about justice and the justice system. Anyway, their advantage is expertise, and they are not in the room with the president all the time. They don't have their office in the White House. The Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense, their offices are in the Pentagon, for example. All right, what's the primary function of the White House staff? To initiate policy? They might do that. Policy is just the government does stuff, and they might start it, I don't know. Ooh, advise the president. I like that one. Represent the bureaucratic agencies? No, the leaders of the departments, where every agency is, or most of the agencies are the secretaries in the cabinet. That's not the White House staff. Provide information to the Office of Management and the Budget? No. Acts as liaison with members of Congress? No. I bet that's what the staff of congressmen do. Let's see. There's a lot of these. The War Powers Resolution. Remember the War Powers Act, or sometimes they call it War Powers Resolution. It is a law that they passed after Korea and Vietnam, where the president is the commander-in-chief, so he sent troops for a police action. The troops fought for a long time. It looked a lot like a war, but Congress never formally declared war, and that's probably the number one trick in the AP test. It's tricking you into saying the commander-in-chief, the president, declares war. He doesn't. It's Congress. So Congress never declared war. So after that, they were like, wait a minute, the president is fighting wars. Well, that's our authority. So they made the War Powers Resolution, where the president could commit troops, because he may need to do so quickly in an emergency, but they have to sort of start coming home after 60 days if war is not declared. There's some sort of 90-day window, maybe it has to be done coming home by then. Those details you don't have to know. There's some sort of 60 and 90-day windows. And at any time, Congress could bring home the troops if they decide to. And that's not a vetoable action. Of course, presidents think that's an unconstitutional infringement of their power as commander-in-chief. They think it's a violation of... They think that's Congress trying to interfere with their powers. They think it's a violation of separation of powers. So let's see if the answers are. Gives the president the power to declare war? No. Requires that Congress report to the president before it cuts military appropriations? No. Remember, that's another influence Congress has over war making, is they fund the military, appropriate money for the military. Requires that the president notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops. I think that's a requirement of the War Powers Resolution, one of those other obscure ones. You've got to let us know if you're going to deploy troops in 48 hours. Allows the National Security Council to conduct military operations if the president is incapacitated. That has nothing to do with it. Shifts military command responsibility from the president to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the relationship between the commander-in-chief and the Congress's power to declare war, and their ongoing dispute about that. And so that sounds like C is related to that. Notice, I didn't remember that fact. But I read all the choices, I crossed out the ones that weren't related at all, and I had an idea of the overall big picture and it helped. That's my way of covering for not really remembering that fact. All right. 44. The constitutional powers of the president include, he's the head of the military. You say commander-in-chief, don't say commander-and-chief. Does he get to veto legislation? Yeah. Oh, there may be a sort of an informal power of the president on this list. I don't want to be tricked by that. All right? There may be an informal power, so it will not be constitutional, but it will exist anyway. Okay, so that might be the picture. C, declaring war, never mind. That's a congressional power. C is the answer. That is not a constitutional authority of the president. The president can grant pardons. The president does appoint ambassadors. It's one of his powers as chief diplomat, appointing ambassadors to foreign nations. But I didn't even have to worry about that. C is definitely the right answer. Whew. E, the Senate must confirm all the following presidential appointments. I wonder if it's White House office, or White House staff. Oh, hey, there it is. That's kind of the thing to know about them, is they're in the office, the White House of the president, advising them every day. They don't need Senate approval. The cabinet does. The heads of the executive agencies does. I'm going to draw a quick graphic of that in a second. The Supreme Court justices obviously do. U.S. attorneys, I don't know, but I definitely know the staff does not require approval. Federal judges, all federal judges require approval. So based on these two choices, it's definitely C. Let me draw a quick drawing of the bureaucracy. Remember, this is a drawing of the executive branch. The president's at the top. Underneath is the 15 kind of cabinet departments. All of them are, now I'm not going to draw all 15 triangles. All of them are roughly pyramidal in their power structure. So at the top of each one of these is the secretary of that department. If this is the Department of the Interior, here's the Secretary of the Interior in charge. Within the Department of the Interior are agencies, so I'll represent them as circles, carrying out different kinds of law. And at the head of each agency is an important enough job that it requires Senate. So every member of the cabinet, secretary of that department, requires Senate approval, as do the heads of the individual agencies, like the head of the CIA, the head of the EPA. It's a good idea to know a few bureaucratic agencies to use as examples. All right. Congressional legislative powers include all the following except legislating federal appropriation. That means spending money. Of course, that's up to Congress. Approving treaties is up to the Senate, 2/3 vote, so that's fine. Establishing a lower court system, is that up to Congress? Yeah. Remember, the Constitution, you're good to go. The Constitution says there will be a Supreme Court. Here is the 4 pieces of its original jurisdiction. All the other sort of details, number of Supreme Court justices, appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, the existence of the lower courts, their structure, their jurisdiction, is all up to Congress. Passing federal laws, obviously pardoning felons, that's up to the president. Is that the last one? What do we got time for? What? There's 4 more. Keep it real. Members of Congress who have appointed adopted the delegate role. Remember, some think that a congressman ought to be a delegate of the people, some think that ought to be a trustee. Delegate means I send you to take care of something for me. So, the delegate theory of representation says congressmen ought to figure out what their constituents want and go represent those views exactly in Congress. Now that's hard to do because your constituents might be a bunch of people who want different things. It's hard to figure out what they want. So that may be unrealistic. The trustee view says that people should just trust them to do what's best, much like a child trusts their parents to do what's best for them. All right. Remember, the framers of the Constitution tended to believe in the trustee idea, that the people may be ignorant. So let's trust the elite to take care of the policy making. All right. So anyway, what's the answer? What does a delegate do? The preferences of the majority of their constituents. That sounds very, very much like a delegate. Their judgment of what's best, that would be a trustee. The instructions of their political party's leadership, their political party's most recent party platform, the advice of congressional staffers and political consultants. They listen to all those things. Those are all influences, but number A is the delegate theory. Which of the following best explains why cabinet secretaries might not aggressively pursue the president's policy agenda? Remember, they don't see him every day. They have their own goals. They have their own department to run. So, cabinet secretaries are unlikely to be a member of the president's party. That's not necessarily true. They're very likely to be a member. He typically appoints his own people from his own party. Not 100% of the time, but that's normally true. Cabinet secretaries may develop strong loyalties to their departments. That's definitely true. They're experts in their field. They typically are working with the day-to-day operations of their gigantic, expensive department with thousands of employees, so they got a lot to do within their own department, so they may not be paying attention to what the president wants. B looks like a good answer. C, cabinet secretaries are likely to compete with the president in a subsequent election. That's not really true. Under the Hatch Act, never heard of it, so I'm probably not going to put this. Cabinet secretaries are prohibited from campaigning on behalf of the president. That's not true. I hope it's not true, because I'm not going to put that. The Freedom of Information Act compels cabinet secretaries to divulge confidential information to the media, and that doesn't seem like a reason to not aggressively pursue the president's agenda. I like B. All right. And as we get towards the end here, the questions, like we say, tend to get more challenging, more obscure sometimes. Which of the following is a unique power held by members of the Senate? This is number 59. The Senate's control the veto? No, the president does. I bet it's filibuster. That's their main, unique power. We'll see. Control of appropriations. Remember, both sides have spending power. Filibuster. That's the answer. They don't get to impeach the president. Who impeaches the president? Who puts him on trial? The House. The Senate tries his removal. They decide whether to remove him or not. The ability to work clearly with a clearly defined constituency is not true of the Senate. They have a statewide constituency, so it's very difficult for them to appeal to everybody. Final question: if Congress adjourns during the 10 days, the president has to consider a bill passed by both houses of Congress, but which the president has not yet signed. Maybe write that a different way. That's confusing, but it's a pocket veto. Remember quickly, line item veto is that is a power that Bill Clinton had for 1 year and then was declared unconstitutional to veto parts of the law. Legislative veto is when the legislature builds in a veto for themselves. They say, hey, executive branch, before you carry this out, check with us, and we can tell you no. That's been declared unconstitutional in the Chadha case. But the War Powers Act is an example of the president having to check with Congress before he does something or while he's doing something. And it's probably unconstitutional, but the War Powers Act is the classic example of a legislative veto. Sometimes we call it a congressional veto, by the way. Executive veto? No, it's pocket veto. It's not judicial review. All right. I'll post this as soon as I can, but I got a busy day today, so it'll probably be Wednesday.